Next we have is construction. Okay, we already started what is interpretation. Another concept that we have is construction. Now, what is construction? Construction is the process of drawing conclusions. Okay, what is interpretation? Interpretation is understanding. Yeah, what is it? Interpretation of statute. Interpretation is like we try to understand, right? We try to interpret meaning of a certain word. But construction is like we try to derive conclusions. Not just we want to get a meaning, but we want to. Interpretation is nothing but we try to derive meaning, right? What does this certain word mean? Construction is like we want to get a conclusion out of this entire thing, what we are reading. We want to get a conclusion. Okay, so it is nothing but drawing conclusion of the subject which are beyond direct expression of the text. When you read the text, you might feel something. Another text you are reading, you might feel something. So you want to derive a conclusion. What is it, that ultimate purpose of it? Like while reading an article, we want to know, right? Like what is the main purpose? Or maybe somebody watched a movie, you can ask, right, what is this movie all about? So they might tell you that, okay, this movie is all about this certain thing. That means might be this movie may be of 2 hours, but they just told you in summary what is the conclusion, right? What is it all about? Same ways in construction, we try to derive conclusions of the subject which are beyond direct expression of the text. The court draw findings after analyzing the meaning of the words used in text or the statute. We would see what is being used, how it is being used, and after that we would try to derive a meaning, we would try to analyze it. When there are certain set of facts pending before the court and construction is applicable of the conclusion of this fact. In order to derive some conclusion, in order to derive some meaning, we need to conclude it, right? After analyzing meaning of all these different words and everything, we need to derive some conclusion. What is it that this legislation is providing, or what is it that this legislation is talking about? Okay, now what are the differences between interpretation and construction? In law, interpretation refers to exposing the true sense of the provision of a statute and to understand the exact meaning of the words used in the text. Like if there are some words which are confusing, we try to know what is this word used for. When we get the word posting, is it posting in relation to appointment and promotion, or is it also including posting in terms of transfer without a promotion? Right, we try to get the meaning out of this certain provision. But what is construction? It refers to drawing conclusions from the written text which are beyond outright expression of legal text. There we want to get a conclusion out of this entire thing, right? What might be the purpose of this entire legislation, in what ways it would be applicable, on whom it would be applicable. We want to derive a conclusion for that. So we want to get some meanings out of those unclear provisions or unclear phrases. Interpretation refers to the linguistic meaning of the legal text. The purpose of construction is to determine legal effect of words and the written text of the statute. So here we just want to know where is it applicable, on whom is it applicable, what would happen if it is applicable on these persons, right? In case of construction, we try to analyze all those different things and finally we try to like conclude it, right? We try to get some meaning out of it. But in interpretation, it just gets some meaning out of the words which are not clear. In case of interpretation, where the simple meaning of the text is to be adopted and the concept of interpretation is being referred to. In case of construction, where the literal meaning of the legal text results in ambiguity, then the concept of construction is adopted. How can we derive a meaning? Okay, if some problems are there, some confusion is there also, which meaning can we adopt? How can we apply it? It's like an overall thing that we have in case of construction. We try to get some meaning. We try to see, is it applicable here? Is it not applicable? If it's applicable, how it would be applicable? We try to get all those details from here. Okay. So in case of construction, we have different rules. First one is harmonious construction. So in case of harmonious construction, it is construction by which harmony or oneness amongst various provisions of an enactment is arrived. That if there is a legislation having two different provisions, if there are 2-3 different legislations having different provisions, what is going to be applicable and how is it going to be applicable? We try to derive some meaning wherein it's not conflicting with the other provisions. When the words of statutory provision bear more than one meaning and there is a doubt as to which meaning should prevail, then such meaning should be adopted by which the words best harmonize with the subject and subject of enactment. So we try to see that, okay, this certain word is very confusing. We try to say, what is this legislation all about? Okay, if this legislation is talking about maybe welfare of workers, then we would try to understand this word in that same direction only. Okay, we don't just try to see meaning of one certain word, but we want to see overall what is this legislation all about, for what purpose it was introduced, and then we try to give it a meaning. Okay, that is nothing but construction. There was this case, Qureshi versus State of Bihar, where Supreme Court held that the state should implement directive principles in a way so as that it will not interfere with fundamental rights. Directive principles and fundamental rights both are given in one single document only, Constitution of India. Fundamental rights are already binding on us. Directive principles are some directions given to the government. So from directive principles, okay, from directive principles, if you want to put anything in fundamental rights, you need to see that you are doing it in such a way that directive principles, okay, implement the directive principles in a way that it would not interfere with fundamental rights. It should not happen that in the name of implementing a directive principle, you are giving a fundamental right which is conflicting with the already existing ones. Okay, you should provide it in such a way that there is harmonious construction between these two provisions of one single document, that is Constitution of India. Okay, so there may be in one legislation, there are two more provisions, there might be multiple legislations talking about certain thing. We need to see that everything comes together and provides us a reason or provides us the concept altogether. Next we have is beneficial construction, which involves giving the widest meaning possible to the statutes. Once we look at only the words, we might get some meaning. Once we read it in reference to the entire subject, we might get some other meaning. So our main purpose should be to give widest meaning, as widest as possible meaning to the statutes. When there are two or more possible ways of understanding a section or a word, the meaning which gives relief and protects the benefit which are purported to be given under the legislation should be chosen. Mostly we see, okay, there is another type of legislation which we have is welfare legislation. Okay, as in a legislation which is introduced only for the purpose of welfare of someone, only to provide some rights, some relief to a person. These are called as welfare legislations. Okay, so if there is a welfare legislation, what we need to see is, we need to see that is it actually serving welfare to that particular person? Is it actually being beneficial to that person? With what object was this legislation introduced? We need to see that part. Okay, so this beneficial construction rule was applied in this case as Shah versus Presiding Officer Labor Code. There is a legislation called Maternity Benefit Act 1961, under which for maternity, right, 6 months leave is being given. That 6 months you need not work, you need not come to office, you need not work, but still you would get salary for those 6 months. Okay, that is nothing but maternity leave. Now in this case, what happened, right, there was an employee of a certain factory, and she claimed for maternity leave, which is for like 6 months, right? So what happened is, it was said that, okay, fine, you need not come to office and you would be getting salary. So otherwise, when you were not pregnant, how many days were you coming to office? You were not coming on Sundays, right? Remaining days only you were coming. So while giving the wages, right, how much money the person should be getting, ideally it's that whatever is your basic salary, that same thing you should be getting, minus the extra earning that you are getting because of extra work or something, whatever is your basic salary that you should be getting. But in this particular case, the factory, right, they wanted to interpret maternity benefit in such a way that they said that, okay, how many ever days you are otherwise coming, minus the Sundays, for that many days only you would be getting the payment. That means it would be lesser than the salary, right? So in this particular case, beneficial construction rule was applied, and it was seen that what was the purpose of this legislation after all? It was to provide benefit to women who are who are delivering a baby, right? So that purpose has to be served. We should not interpret it in such a way that, okay, how many days you would have otherwise been working for those many days. No, it tries to provide that benefit. That means whatever is the regular basic salary, that particular salary the person should be getting. That is nothing but beneficial construction, because this entire legislation was introduced for somebody's benefit. So we need to see, is that person actually getting a benefit or not? Okay. And when we talk about this legislation, it is also one of the legislations which is introduced in terms of the directive that is given under Article 42, that states should try to provide just and human condition of work and maternity relief. Working conditions should be proper. It should not happen that because of economic necessity, people are forced to work in such kind of a condition which is not suitable for them. That should not happen. So in terms of that, we need to get meaning or derive a meaning out of it. Okay, then we have reasonable construction. Reasonable construction, it is nothing but based on interpretation of statute is made in, it should be done in a meaningful and sensible manner. Reasonable, as in some reasoning has to be there. When we are interpreting a certain provision, meaning has to be assigned. It should not happen that just for the purpose of interpreting, we are simply giving meaning to each of the words and getting something, right? It should provide a meaning, and everything should match with the other things. A reasoning should be there. If a statute is having two interpretations, when we try to understand it in a normal, ordinary way, there are two ways to understand this particular provision. One is completely vague and absurd, and other one is perfectly making sense. Then the meaningful interpretation would be used. How we would construct this particular provision, where we are getting more meaning of it, that particular provision we would use, not where we are simply adding meaning to each and every word and we are getting some kind of a construction. That rule would not apply, but where it is serving some purpose, where it is making sense, that particular construction rule would be applicable. That particular way of construction will be applicable for it. There was this case where court stated that if language of a statute leads to, it's not very clear, okay, that if you try to interpret it in that given certain format, only it would lead to injustice. In such a case, construction may be put upon it, which modifies the meaning of the words used in the statute. We need to try to interpret it, or we need to try to derive meaning in such a way that it is making sense. It's not that we are simply adding meaning to the words and whatever we are deriving, we are simply accepting. That should not happen. Okay, entire thing has to give some valid, meaningful understanding of the concept altogether. Okay. So whenever a legislation is introduced, there would be some purpose for which it has been introduced. So while we are using it, while we are interpreting it, there also we need to ensure that it actually is serving the purpose. For that, we have all these different rules of interpretation, construction, all of that we have. So fine, then I will be sharing this unit 4 one more time with you, okay, with the questions we discussed yesterday as well as today. So you can go through these ones as well, okay.